From inside the warehouse at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, it is the MASN All Access Podcast. Yennier Cano and Brendan Mortensen here with you, back on the couches, which means I get to show off my brand new orange kicks, Brendan.
Yeah, those things are bright.
I got 4 compliments on this yesterday walking around Camden Yards, so yeah, I think they're off to a good start here. I think I nailed it.
Sure.
With the pick there, Brendan.
I mean, you have blinded the viewers at home here and the cameras, but yeah.
I did get a couple, whoa, did you just take those out of the box? And I said, yes, I did.
They are
Ordered them
bright.
online. I'm just saying, Melanie Newman, may have some competition for best shoe game.
Yeah.
At Camden Yards. I'm just saying.
Could be.
Maybe we start a friendly rivalry there. Have to one-up each other.
Sure. I mean, you would lose, but,
I probably would.
Some rivalries can be lopsided. That's okay.
You've got the orange accent on yours, Brendan.
Right. I'm more of a pop of color kind of guy.
You do. Every time I ask for your advice in buying clothing, mostly shoes, you always say, don't go for the solid, wow color.
Right.
Just pop of color, right?
Right. And you didn't listen to that advice in any way, shape, or form with these shoes, but,
I got to blaze my own path, Brendan.
You do.
And in this case, it's all orange.
It's a bright orange
It
path.
works for Syracuse. It's a multifaceted response there. Brendan, I want to shout out somebody who had a nice review for us.
That hardly ever happens.
I know.
It's usually mean ones.
Yeah, it is. But it was a nice review from Matthew and then a bunch of numbers, then Guy. He said, fave podcast ever. They know their stuff. He says, pancakes for the win. And he said, anyway, this comment could be read aloud on the pod. It would make my step-uncle's day. We bond over the Orioles and this podcast, which is really nice. So thank you.
Nice.
Thanks, had to shout him out. And, of course, if you have a good review, maybe you can get yourself on the MASN All Access Podcast.
Because there are so few of them that we have to read the ones that are good.
We read the nice comments as they come in.
We do.
Although they are few and far between.
Right.
But thank you very much for that compliment. All right, Brendan. We don't have a softball update, so we might as well just get into the thing. For some reason, last night's beautiful day meant to rain out for our softball league.
Collusion, I think.
I was going to work, and so maybe I pulled some strings behind the scenes to keep my Cal Ripken streak intact.
Collusion on your part.
Yes. Who am I colluding with?
I don't know.
The league?
I guess so.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to miss the game, and I have to keep the streak intact.
You do.
So, had to pull some strings. All right, Brendan, let's talk Orioles. And this incredible start to the season, 15-7.
Yeah.
Is the Baltimore Orioles record at this point. At this point last year, you know what their record was?
Not good.
8-14.
Not great.
You know what 15-7 is on pace for?
Better than 8-14?
Well, no, I mean, extrapolate it throughout the entire season.
I know.
What the pace is.
I was trying to be funny.
Okay. Well, it is better than that. It's a 110-win season. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. It could.
It could.
You never know. It's an absolutely scorching start to the season for the Baltimore Orioles. They're hitting the cover off the ball. After some shaky performances to start the season from some pitchers, we've seen them settle down a little bit. We're seeing them beat up on some bad teams. We're going to talk about how much this hot start can be tacked up to the result of the Orioles having a very soft schedule, but we do need to give credit to the Orioles where it's due for beating the teams on their schedule. They have looked like a very, very good baseball team through the season's first 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, I think there's a very simple takeaway here, which is that even if you want to make the case that the Orioles are just beating up on some lesser teams, which they kind of have been, good teams beat the teams that they are supposed to beat.
Yeah.
Which is very simple, but it's what's happening here. The Orioles are a better team than the Athletics. They took 3 out of 4 games there. They are better so far than the Chicago White Sox. They take 2 out of 3 there, take both games against the Nationals, and sweep the Tigers. Those are 4 teams that the Orioles are just better than, expect to be better than this season. And if you were going to make the playoffs, you have to take care of business in the series against teams that you are better than.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and last year, I mean, the Orioles lost some games in September that put them out of the race when they were very much in the thick of it. But we've made the case on this podcast all along that if the Orioles had simply started the season better, they would have had a much, much better chance of making the playoffs.
Yeah, they went 7-14 in April.
Yeah.
And that April stretch included dropping 3 of 4 against the Athletics. And then in mid-May, they got swept by the Tigers. Two teams that they should have beaten early on last year, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And now they're beating the teams that they need to.
And Adley Rutschman, of course, was a big catalyst in that turnaround when he joined the team in late May. And they have a much better roster than they do right now. But Brendan, it is certainly one of the softer parts of the schedule right now. They're playing the Red Sox, which these are the projected preseason win totals, according to Vegas. The Red Sox are projected to win 77 games. Texas, 81 games. Yankees, they're going to be a great team, 94 wins. Washington, projected to have the worst record in baseball with 59. Oakland, 59.5. The White Sox, 82 wins. Detroit, 69 wins. So certainly the opponents are weaker.
Sure.
But Brian Baker said, according to MASNsports.com's Rockabacco, we used to be the soft part of other teams' schedules.
Yeah.
These are teams that these were not guaranteed wins last year or the year before or the year before. And the Orioles simply were not a better team than some of these teams last year or the year before that.
Yeah, and even some of the teams early on in the year when the Orioles were floating right around 500, they still took 2 or 3 against the Rangers, who have, I believe, a top 5 record in baseball right now. You didn't get swept by the Yankees, which, you're not going to take a victory lap for taking 1 of 3, but the Yankees are still a very good team, probably one of the best teams in the American League, and you got through that tougher stretch of games. Now you're in the softer stretch, and you've got the 3rd best record in baseball. That's what you're supposed to do when you have a soft part of your schedule. You're supposed to take advantage of it, and you're supposed to give yourself a little bit of a cushion for when the schedule starts to get harder.
Yeah, and just quite frankly, at this point last year, I wasn't looking at the schedule and saying, well, the Orioles are a better team than the White Sox. They should beat them. Well, the Orioles are a better team than the Rangers. They should beat them. And they changed the narrative. So I look at the schedule so much differently. There are so many more teams that I say the Orioles are better than that team. Yeah. And they should win those games. And so the expectations are higher, certainly. But that's a great thing. That's how it should be, because that means that you have a better team. It means you have a proven track record of being a better team than some of the teams on this list. And the schedule doesn't get harder, really, until the first week of May. They play Detroit after the series against the Red Sox. They go to Detroit for 4 games to close out April. Then they go at Kansas City, 2 of the worst teams. I think when all is said and done, those will be 2 teams with pretty poor records in the American League.
Yep.
Once you get into May, that's when things get a little bit dicier. Because then you go at Atlanta, you're home against the Rays, you're home against the Pirates, who are all of a sudden really good.
Yeah.
Good for them.
Good for the Pirates.
Good for the Pirates.
I want to say, too, real quick on that note, the Pirates and Orioles are tending to get lumped together when I'm seeing, national media talk about some surprising teams towards the top of the standings this year. Pittsburgh and Baltimore are not in the same place. Baltimore narrowly missed the playoffs last season. Pittsburgh was not a very good team last season. And this is nothing against the Pirates. I mean, they are a very fun story right now. You're having some guys come out of nowhere and have great seasons. Andrew McCutchen has come back, and he's having a great season so far. Nothing against the Pirates. But the Orioles were maybe not expected to be here, not a top 5 record in baseball, but the Orioles were still expected to be good. They were expected to be a fringe playoff team. The Pirates have come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit... I don't love seeing the Pirates and the Orioles placed in the same category when they are talked about in a broader baseball media sense. These are 2 teams in 2 different places. The Orioles are expecting to win. The Pirates are the more fun story.
Yeah, maybe the Pirates are a year behind the Orioles.
Yeah, maybe the Pirates are the Orioles of last year.
Right.
But they are not the Orioles of this year.
Right. Yeah, I think the Pirates are still catching up, and we'll see how long that winning lasts for them. It may last until the end of the season. They could be in the NL wildcard race by the end of the year. But yeah, I agree with you, Brendan. I think the Orioles are certainly built to win longer than the Pirates right now.
Absolutely. They're a more talented roster, quite frankly.
And there are other better teams on the schedule in May. They go at Toronto. They go at New York. They're home against Cleveland. So there are better teams, not just the Pirates, on their May schedule.
Right. Yeah, and Brian with a good point on YouTube saying you can't win the season in April, but you can lose it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the Orioles did last year. They went 7-14 in April, put themselves in a really tough position to make a run down the stretch, And now the Orioles are in a pretty good spot where they can go into the middle part of the season with a lot of momentum if they're able to carry this into May. We're still very early on. This doesn't put you in the playoffs, having the third best record in baseball as the calendar is still in April, but you haven't lost momentum. You haven't put yourself in a tough position where you have to make up a ton of ground at the end of the year.
And I can think of two recent examples for that for the Orioles. You can't win the season in April, certainly. We saw the 2017 Orioles coming off a wild card appearance. They jumped out to a 14-7 record, much like this team did. And then they struggled mightily, especially in September, and ended up missing the playoffs. They did not secure their playoff bid just because of a hot start in April. And then, by the same token, you can lose the season in April. Like the team the year after that, the 2018 Orioles, they dug themselves in such a deep hole in the month of April that things just started to spiral from there. So they did get themselves out of a situation. I do think it's possible to dig yourself out of an early hole like we saw with the Washington Nationals in 2019.
We saw it last year.
We saw it with the Phillies.
With the Orioles.
Yeah, we saw it last year.
Where they almost made the playoffs, but starting better now puts you in a much better position.
We saw it with the Phillies last year, but they made a change. They fired their manager. So just better to start the season on fire. Just
hot take.
On fire. But beat the teams that are in front of you.
Right.
And that's what the Orioles are doing right now. And that's why it's exciting to see. And they look like a good team right now. Mm-hmm. It's not like they're just, getting lucky in some instances and sneaking away with some wins. They look definitively, in the last several series, they have looked like the better team. They look like a much better team right now. I will say, again, it's April. They look like a much better team than the Boston Red Sox right now.
Yeah, they passed the eye test.
Yeah.
I mean, even in last night's game, the Orioles go down 4-0 early, but the offense has been so good that you didn't really think that game was over when the Orioles were down 4-0. And Orioles teams of the past few years, maybe the offense isn't there to come back from an early 4-0 deficit. Maybe the clubhouse chemistry isn't there to believe that you can come down from an early 4-0 deficit. But yesterday, it just didn't feel like the Orioles were out of that game. And then, of course, they weren't. They come back to win.
Yeah, and how about the bullpen? Being able to pick up Dean Kramer. And Dean Kramer did a good job bouncing back after giving up 4 runs in the first 3 innings. He settled down, and he pitched well for the last couple innings. And then the bullpen, which, again, is down 2 big arms. They're down Dylan Tate, and they're down Michael Gibbons. 2 of the more veteran, experienced arms in this bullpen. And they're still putting up zeros.
Yeah.
They're asked to do quite a lot. It helped that, I think, the past week, when you look at the end of that road trip, especially in Washington, the Orioles were able to get a couple off days there. The Monday, Thursday off day helped. And then they were able to get some strong performances from their starters. Guys going deep into games like Kramer, like Gibson, that helped rest that bullpen because we saw the first 3 weeks they were being overused and a little bit overtaxed. Now they're a little bit better rested, and they're getting great contributions from guys coming out of nowhere, i.e., Yennier Cano.
Yeah, let's talk about
Let's talk about Yennier.
What a dude.
What a dude indeed. 7 perfect innings. He has 1 balk, so I guess you can't call it a perfect inning if he's got a balk.
Maybe. I mean, he still isn't allowed a base runner.
Yeah.
Right? He hasn't allowed a hit. He hasn't allowed a walk. His whip is 0.
I'm thinking if a pitcher pitched a perfect game but had a balk, but there'd be nobody on base.
There'd be nobody on base.
So I don't know what you can call that.
I still think you would call it 7 perfect innings.
Yeah. No hits,
No hits,
walks, no
9
hit by
strikeouts.
pitches. Yeah. Incredible stuff from Yennier Cano. I guess, Brendan, you and I and everybody in general just didn't learn anything from the Felix Bautista story because nobody saw this coming.
Yeah.
And he's come out of nowhere and been phenomenal.
Well, look, it's hard to see something like this coming. It's not like we counted Yennier Cano out. It's just we didn't really count him in. Because at the beginning of the season, it's not like you and I were sitting on these couches bashing Yennier Cano for his bad numbers. Yennier Cano just didn't really factor into our conversations very much because when we were looking at the Orioles bullpen with, at that point, a healthy Michael Givens, and we didn't think Dylan Tate would be out terribly long, we were looking at the bullpen and saying, okay, Mike Baumann probably comes in for Dylan Tate, and Yennier Cano is still not on the radar.
Yeah.
And then some more injuries happen. The Orioles need more bullpen arms. All of a sudden, here's Yennier Cano, and he's really good.
Yeah.
I mean, he's, again, it's not a fluke 7 innings, it seems like. He's passing the eye test. Hitters are not, it's not like he's given up a ton of hard contact and just getting lucky and defenders are making great plays behind him.
We've seen a couple of those.
We've seen a couple of
the
good
line
plays.
out to end the game last night.
Right.
But overall, I mean, the 9 Ks is pretty encouraging.
Right. And I'm not going to overreact to 7 innings and say that he is the new go-to guy in the Orioles bullpen, but he's a go-to guy in the Orioles bullpen at this point. I think it's pretty safe to say.
Yeah, and it's safe to say, I think once Givens and Tate come back, unless something dramatically changes over the next several weeks, and Givens is expected to start rehab later this week, he could probably ramp up quicker than Tate, who's expected to start his rehab tonight in Aberdeen. And remember, Tate didn't have any spring training, so he's going to take a while to get back. I think it's safe to say Cano is still going to be part of this bullpen.
Oh, yeah. I don't see how he can't be at this point, especially given the fact that there are some bullpen arms that are struggling a little bit right now. Yennier Cano would certainly not be at the top of your list to say, okay, once Dylan Tate comes back, who's going to be out of this bullpen? Because what else would he need to do?
Yeah.
Continue to not allow any base runners? Because that's what he's doing right now.
It's funny because you see some comparisons. You can draw some comparisons with Felix Bautista, who was added to the 40-man roster because of his strikeout numbers a couple years ago, makes the opening day roster.
And because he could throw 100.
And fixes, somehow magically in the big leagues, fixes all of his walk issues and his command issues and becomes a dominant reliever and then a closer. You could also make some comparisons to Jorge Lopez. But Jorge Lopez was a starter in the big leagues for several years with the Royals, with the Orioles, struggled in that role, and was moved to the bullpen. And you and I said all offseason, before the 2022 season, that it was likely that Lopez would lead the team in saves, and we could see him really turning his career around.
Yeah, not to pat ourselves on the back, but we kind of saw Jorge Lopez coming.
Yeah.
Maybe not to the extent that we thought he would be an all-star, but we thought he had a chance to be one of the better bullpen arms on the team last year.
Yeah, and it's funny because Yennier Cano, if you recall, was one of the 4 pitchers the Orioles got back for Jorge Lopez.
Would you look at that?
In fact. So the Orioles, we said when the Orioles traded for him last year, he seemed like the most throw-in of the 4 pitchers that they got back in that trade. They got a couple low-level prospects. One guy who's was pitching down in the Florida Complex League. They got another pitcher who's down in Delmarva, I believe. And it just felt like he was the least likely to make a big impact on the team. And then we saw him pitch in 3 big league games last year, and he really struggled.
Yeah, he walked everybody.
And in his big league experience in 2022 between the Twins and the Orioles, in 18 innings, he gave up 23 runs.
It's not good.
That is not the same pitcher that we've seen through 7 innings this year.
Yeah, last year he was the cleanup crew in a very different sense.
Yeah.
He was the cleanup crew in Brandon Hyde, and the Orioles were down like 5 runs, and they needed somebody to just come in and eat an inning, and it didn't really matter how many runs Yennier Cano gave up. And now he is the cleanup crew in terms of if you are in a mess in the 7th or 8th inning, Yennier Cano might be the guy.
Yeah, it's incredibly exciting development because you look down the road and you say Tate and Givens are coming back. Honestly, Austin Voth has pitched better, but Voth has struggled at times. You know, it makes it a little bit easier to send somebody down. Voth doesn't have any options, but somebody else who may have options, send them down because you feel better about Yennier Cano. The Orioles are just loaded in terms of bullpen options. The emergence of Mike Baumann has been a major development as well.
Danny Coulombe.
Let's talk about Danny Coulombe real quick.
Unbelievable StatCast page.
Look at Danny Coulombe's StatCast, and it is covered with red. He is in the 99th percentile in average exit velo.
Yep.
Expected batting average, expected slugging percentage, 95th in K percentage, 100th percentile in hard hit percentage. That means he probably hasn't given up a single hard hit.
No. He's 93rd percentile in barrel percentage, 99th in expected slug. I mean, everything. Everything is good for Danny Coulombe. His worst percentile ranking on StatCast is his walk rate, which is a laughably terrible 75th percentile.
Got to give the Orioles credit for identifying him right before opening day as somebody that they should go out and trade for.
How do they keep doing this?
They keep doing it. It's a good scouting department.
Yeah.
A good major league scouting in a program headed up by Mike Snyder, and it's good job by Mike Elias to go out and realize they can develop this guy.
Yeah, because you and I are not scouts. We do our best with the numbers that we have available to us. We try to look at as many advanced metrics as we can on FanGraphs, on StatCast, whatever it may be. We do our best to evaluate these players when trades happen. Danny Coulombe was one of those players where you and I were just kind of digging through the advanced metrics, trying to find things on StatCast. And it was one of those trades where you were just like, I don't really know what the Orioles are seeing in Danny Coulombe when you're looking at the advanced metrics. But obviously the Orioles were able to identify some things that they knew would be able to translate well to their coaching staff, to the system that they have developed here in Baltimore, and you see the results.
Yeah, and we spent all offseason saying he was probably the guy they would cut if they needed a spot on the 40-man.
Yeah, because it was like, what's Danny Coulombe doing?
Yeah.
I don't know why this trade happened. I don't know what the Orioles saw. What's going on?
Yeah, and yet he's been great so far.
Yep.
So it's to say, like you said, Brendan, we're not scouts. Like, it's the same reason that we don't come out with, prospect rankings, because we know that there's a lot that we don't know.
Yeah, we do our best to evaluate given the numbers that we have. We don't have the information of the organization. Obviously, they saw a lot of things that did not show up on a game-to-game basis.
Yeah, exactly. Well, something that we can tell you definitively, Jackson Holliday is a good prospect.
That's a hot take, but
he's a good young player.
Yeah.
Excellent,
some might say.
I would turn up the heat on that take.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible stuff in 13 games from Jackson Holliday in single-A Delmarva, to the point where the Orioles said, you don't need to be in Delmarva anymore.
No.
Goodbye, Salisbury. Welcome to High-A Aberdeen for 19-year-old Jackson Holliday.
I mean, he had a .523 on-base percentage. That's a joke.
Yeah.
He's 19, playing in Delmarva. I understand that it's low-A Delmarva, but still, he's playing against guys older than him. Still... And he hits .392 with a .523 on-base percentage, an OPS over 1,100, more walks than strikeouts. Mike Elias talked about it on MASN's broadcast yesterday, where you're trying to find the right combination between not pushing a guy too far, but still making sure that he is challenged. And remarkably, it did not seem like 19-year-old Jackson Holliday was in any way challenged by the pitching that he was facing in Delmarva. I mean, he had a whopping 12 strikeouts and then 14 walks.
Yeah. He picked up right where we expected him to pick up last year. I know his batting average wasn't incredibly high in his small sample size in Delmarva last year, but we figured he was going to be this good considering he was in big league spring training.
Yeah, .392 this year is pretty good.
Yeah, I would say so. He's been everything that they've expected him to be and more. The only thing is, don't expect these kind of gaudy numbers in Aberdeen because he's going up a level. Aberdeen is a pitcher's park, and it's a pitcher's league. And Mike Elias has said that yesterday. Essentially, don't expect him. How many times have we said on this podcast, Brendan, we've seen guys struggle in Aberdeen?
Yeah.
We saw Gunnar Henderson struggle. We saw Colton Cowser struggle. We've seen top prospects seemingly to our eyes hit a wall, and their counting numbers don't look as good. But if you look at the advanced numbers and you look at some of the numbers the Orioles have access to that we don't, I expect Jackson Holliday to continue to perform well.
Yeah, I'm not going to expect a .523 on-base percentage in Aberdeen or for him to hit .392, but I also wouldn't be all that shocked if Jackson Holliday is still getting on base at like a .375, 400 clip.
Yeah.
Because his plate approach is just that good. As you said, I'm still not expecting it, though. The pitchers are going to be better. They have a better command of the strike zone. Jackson Holliday is not going to be able to punish as many mistakes as he probably saw in Delmarva. Pitches are not going to miss as much as they did in Delmarva. And we talked with, guys like Judd Fabian, Dylan Beavers down in Aberdeen about a week ago. It's interesting to hear how their mentality changes, too, at that park. I mean, Judd Fabian, his nickname was Juddy Jacks. Like, the guy hits home runs. And he was saying in Aberdeen, like, yeah, you're just trying to hit to the gaps here because it's hard to hit home runs in Aberdeen. Jackson Holliday, not really a power hitter anyway. He's probably going to continue to hit for gap-to-gap power, and if the home runs come, great. I'm still expecting great things from him. Not these kinds of numbers, but still good things.
And I'm curious to see where he plays defensively because we saw him play 8 games at shortstop, 5 games at second base when he was with Delmarva this season. I think the Orioles are playing Jackson Holliday where they see him fitting the best, but he hasn't played any games at third base yet. When we saw guys like Gunnar Henderson make his way through the lower levels of the minor league, he was playing a lot of shortstop, a lot of third base. Wasn't until he got up to Norfolk that they really tried him at second base. It appears the Orioles view Holliday more as a shortstop, second base.
Yeah.
And I also think this kind of folds nicely into the Orioles' long-term plans because they have so many guys right now between current big leaguers and prospects on the left side of the infield, between Jorge Mateo, Gunnar Henderson, Joey Ortiz, Jordan Westberg. They've got Kobe Mayo, Ramon Arias. They've got guys on the left side of the infield for the next 2-3 years, and maybe even longer than that they feel comfortable with. I don't know what the combination is going to be, what the best combination is going to be at the big leagues, but it seems like the bigger long-term need might be at second base.
Yeah.
And so if Jackson Holliday can play a quality shortstop, that's excellent. But Joey Ortiz might be your best defensive shortstop in the system. Jorge Mateo might really be this good and have Gold Glove caliber defense at shortstop on top of being a quality hitter. So I think they feel good about the talent that they have at shortstop and third base. So if Jackson Holliday is your long-term second baseman, just because you have other better defensive players at shortstop and third base, not the end of the world.
Yeah, and 2 guys that you didn't even mention that he'll be playing with. You've got Freddie Bencosme, who is one of your better shortstop prospects in the system. At shortstop, more than likely in Aberdeen. And then at third base, you've got Max Wagner, who was a top 50 pick in last year's draft. And I'm not saying that you are going to value the development of Freddie Bencosme and Max Wagner over the development of Jackson Holliday. Obviously, Holliday becomes the priority in Aberdeen in terms of where you want to put him defensively for his development. But it's at least worth noting that you have 2 top 15 prospects in your system who are pretty cemented in the left side of the infield. Bencosme can probably move around from shortstop and third base. Talked with Max Wagner last week. He said he's been getting a lot of time at second base and first base. I would imagine that Holliday, Bencosme, and Wagner have a pretty solid rotation of playing second, shortstop, and third. All 3 of those guys might play all 3 of those positions this year for Aberdeen, too.
Yeah, and talk about one guy that the Orioles are going to make room for, and they're going to prioritize the development of Heston Kjerstad.
Yes.
Elias said last night on the broadcast that, paraphrasing here, but essentially if Heston Kjerstad keeps hitting the ball the way that he's been hitting the ball, there's really not a need to keep him down in AA Bowie for that much longer. And he said, we'll make room for Heston Kjerstad when asked by, I can't remember if it was Jim Palmer or Kevin Brown, about whether or not he was, there was enough room for him in Norfolk because of the amount of talent there. He said, we'll make room. I think there is room right now. They have Heston Kjerstad, on his way. But right now in AAA, they've got Daz Cameron, who's on the roster. They've got Shane Fontana, who's on the roster there. Hudson Haskin, unfortunately, our guy, Brendan, has hit the IL with a left hamstring strain. I think Cameron or Fontana could be, somebody who is on the outs there if and when the Orioles decide to bump Heston Kjerstad up. But exciting to hear that Heston Kjerstad, it may not be long for AA Bowie.
Heston Kjerstad's not going to play in the majors this year, right?
If he,
we're talking coming into the year, it felt like there was no way.
It's April 25th, and we're talking about him being bumped up to Norfolk. It hasn't happened yet, but we're talking about it.
Yeah, because he's mashing in Bowie.
Yeah.
He's got a 981 OPS in 13 games. He's got, 5 homers so far in this point?
Yeah.
And it's not just the Bowie numbers. We've said this all off season long. At the end of last year, he was putting up some great numbers in Aberdeen. As they were in the playoffs, he was doing some really great things. And then he goes to the Arizona Fall League and is the best player in the Arizona Fall League. Absolutely mashes there. Then he goes to Major League Spring Training and spends a much longer time there than we thought he would because he just kept tearing the cover off the ball. I mean, it felt like every time we talked about Heston Kjerstad in spring training, he was hitting like 500.
Yeah.
And so it's not surprising to me that he has an unbelievable OPS in Bowie. I mean, there's a reason that this guy was the number 2 overall pick. Obviously, the 2 years where he wasn't able to play have been well documented, but he's just come back in such a strong and impressive fashion that I'm not even surprised that he is playing this well in Bowie.
Yeah, and you mentioned whether or not he could play in Baltimore by season's end. Now the Orioles have a group of outfield prospects. We knew coming into the season they were going to have a group of infield prospects in Norfolk between Westberg and Ortiz and Norby. Now they have a group of outfield prospects.
Yeah.
Kyle Stowers made the opening day roster but was sent back down to get more playing time. Heston Kjerstad could be on his way up. Colton Cowser was the International Player of the Week. They have 3 outfielders potentially in Norfolk soon who could be a step away from the big leagues. And the order of those guys is going to be interesting.
Yep.
Stowers is the closest to the big leagues because he's the oldest. He was drafted the earliest. He's already made his big league debut. He's already lost his prospect status. But has he now been bumped behind Colton Cowser?
I don't think so. I mean, Colton Cowser is playing really well. Kyle Stowers is also playing very well in AAA Norfolk. He has an .819 OPS, which is a little bit worse than we saw from him last year. But the on-base percentage and the plate discipline is much better than we saw from him last year. He's getting on base at a 400 clip right now. The strikeout numbers are down. I think he only has 12 strikeouts in 12 games from Norfolk as opposed to 10 walks, which is great progression from Kyle Stowers. I'm sure that was a point of emphasis for him when the Orioles sent him down to AAA Norfolk, that yes, he can be a power-hitting left-handed corner outfielder, but I'm sure the Orioles also wanted to see the plate discipline improve as well so that he wasn't striking out 130 times in a season if he had a full big league year. So to see the improved plate discipline from Kyle Stowers is excellent. However, we are also seeing that from Colton Cowser, who already gets on base at a great clip.
Yeah.
And he's hitting for power, and he's hitting for average. And we already expected him to maybe be a mid-season call-up somewhere over the summer.
It's interesting.
I think they're close.
They're both lefties.
Yeah.
They both play a similar role as being corner outfielders. I mean, maybe
Cowser could probably play center, though. I think Cowser is a better defensive corner outfielder, certainly, and probably a better defensive center fielder as well, which you don't really need in the big leagues because at this point you have Mullins, Hayes, McKenna, who can all play center field, but it's nice to have.
Right. And the question is, though, is one of those spots up for grabs? It's certainly not Austin Hayes the way he's hitting the ball. It's certainly not Cedric Mullins. Maybe McKenna.
Maybe Taryn Vavra, who we know has gotten some time in the outfield as well.
So if there's one injury, if there's one opening, who it goes to is going to be fascinating. And if there are 2, then it's both those guys. But in the meantime, they're just going to marinate in AAA.
Yeah. I mean, Richard on YouTube commenting, very pleasant problem to have.
It is.
Again, not that it's a problem, but we are at a logjam right now.
Yeah.
Because you have, as you mentioned, say there is an injury in the Orioles outfield. Maybe that doesn't happen right now because I think this is probably too early for Colton Cowser or Heston Kjerstad to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah.
But let's say there's an injury that happens in July in the Orioles outfield. There's a very good possibility that you have to decide whether to call up Kyle Stowers, Colton Cowser, or maybe even Heston Kjerstad at that point.
Yeah.
The same thing can be said about the Orioles infield right now. We saw it almost happen with Ramon Urias when, he had the scary ball to the face. We didn't know if he was going to have to go on the injured list. Didn't know if Jorge Mateo was going to have to go on the injured list. Both those guys are fine, thankfully. We already saw Joey Ortiz get pulled from the Norfolk lineup, but that was just because Jordan Westberg was dealing with a back injury.
We think that's only because.
More than likely because...
Maybe if Westberg was healthy,
right,
they would go with Ortiz anyway.
But Westberg wasn't an option at that point because he was injured. But still, if an injury happens in the infield right now, are you going with Westberg? Are you going with Ortiz? It's a good problem, but it's still a logjam because eventually you're going to have to figure out where these guys go.
If and when Kjerstad gets promoted to AAA Norfolk, we're talking about the Orioles number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 prospects.
They're here.
Being in AAA. Grayson Rodriguez is number 1. He's in the big leagues. Jackson Holliday's number 2. He's in High A Aberdeen. So 3 through 8, according to MLB Pipeline, is in Norfolk.
They're here. That's not even including Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson, who were number one prospects over the last few years.
So the Orioles are winning baseball games right now. They're 15-7. That's great. Because if the Orioles were losing baseball games right now, we'd be looking at this a whole lot differently and saying which one of these guys is going to get called up.
Yeah.
But right now, they don't need this. I mean, it's a luxury at this point that they have maybe the best AAA team in the history of AAA teams, because they don't need to fill any spots seemingly right now. Now, maybe things will change over the next few weeks and guys will drop off and we'll see some dips in production. Then we start having these conversations. But for right now, these guys, it's a similar conversation that we had in the offseason. These prospects should not be burning a hole in the Orioles' pocket.
No.
Because you don't have to do anything with them. So long as everybody, knock on wood, stays healthy and stays productive, and the Orioles keep winning ball games, you don't have to worry about this. You can keep them down in Norfolk for as long as you can keep them down in Norfolk.
Yeah, and we're seeing comments on Facebook as well, questioning whether the Orioles could move some of these prospects for major league talent, which is a possibility. And you have that possibility because you have a lot of prospects who are close to the big league level, who could be contributors pretty soon for another team if they decide to move big league talent and think that their window is a little bit further down the line. But the fact of the matter right now, Paul, is that as we are in late April, the Baltimore Orioles have the third best record in baseball with the best farm system in baseball.
It's a great spot to have.
Pretty good spot.
Yeah. So maybe they make a move.
Yeah.
Maybe they still have a need for a starting pitcher. They have the starting pitching depth, certainly. Whether or not they have the top-end guys is another question. But they have the depth. Yeah. Because they have 5 guys right now. Dean Kramer certainly hit a rough patch. He did yesterday against the Red Sox. They have Cole Irvin, who hit his rough patch, but he's down in AAA. They feel like if they need to, he can start some games. DL Hall, not awesome in Norfolk right now, 4.40 ERA for the Tides. They have the depth. Whether or not they have the top end is to be seen. Yep. And we'll see when John Means comes back, maybe in July. But that's still the only area that I could see the Orioles really going out and taking a big swing on a star-level player. I can't see them really doing it at any other position. Can you?
No, I can't, because there isn't really another position where you either don't have high-end talent or don't have the potential for high-end talent waiting in the wings.
Yeah.
Because, starting pitcher, as you just mentioned, it's possible that they go out and trade for another guy, but even there, you have Grayson Rodriguez with high-end potential, Kyle Bradish with high-end potential. I still think DL Hall has high-end potential, even though he has struggled a little bit in AAA Norfolk. Catcher, you're fine. First base, you're fine. Second base, Adam Frazier is playing really well right now, and you have a bunch of middle infield prospects, Connor Norby, Jordan Westburg, Joey Ortiz. That could all be great second basemen. Shortstop, fine. Third base, you're fine.
Yeah.
Austin Hayes is a high-end talent. Cedric Mullins is a high-end talent. And then Anthony Santander is a high-end talent. And you still have all the outfield prospects in AAA or AA right now.
Yeah. And the thing is, this is not the time to make moves. I mean, most teams right now, if they went into the season thinking they were going to be competitive, they probably still think that. Teams are not punting on the season 3 weeks in that thought they were going to be competitive.
Corbin Burns has a 450.
He does.
Could buy low.
I don't think that the Brewers are very good right now, and I think they'd
not.
rather have Corbin Burns. Yeah. So, and the teams that went into the season thinking they'd struggle, I think teams like to hold on to those guys until they get much closer to the trade deadline to bump up the demand for these guys and the pressure, and so I don't think a move is on the horizon. Yeah, you don't see big blockbusters going down at the end of April, at the beginning of May, very often.
Yeah, but the Orioles are in a very good spot where if they wanted to make a trade, closer to the deadline, where you have a bunch of guys succeeding at AAA and you're still in a pretty good spot record-wise, could certainly see them being buyers at the deadline.
Yeah, absolutely.
One more random point that I want to make is if we haven't put enough feathers in Mike Elias's cap today, a lot of fans were freaking out about Francie Cordero because Francie Cordero had a pretty good weekend here.
He did.
At Oriole Park at Camden Yards, hit a few home runs.
He did.
Looked like a solid player there. Just want to talk about Francie Cordero's stats real quick.
Sure.
He's hitting 174 with a 208 on base percentage and a 665 OPS. In a small sample size, Ryan O'Hearn has an OPS over 1,000.
1,000. It's like 4 games or something.
It's 4 games. Yeah. I just wanted to point that out. Just wanted to kind of throw that out.
Wow.
There.
Francie Cordero catching strays here on the MASN All Access Podcast.
Mike Elias was catching a lot of strays on a certain bird app for, how could he possibly let Francie Cordero go? He was mashing in spring training. What could the Orioles possibly be seeing with letting Francie Cordero go to a division rival? They were seeing a hitter who hits 175.
Yeah, exactly. It's worked out so far.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to touch on, Brendan?
No, I think we've thoroughly put enough feathers in Mike Elias's cap for today, but rightfully so.
Yeah.
Third best record in baseball. Best farm system in baseball. It's a good time to be an Orioles fan.
It is a good time to be an Orioles fan. Brendan, real quick, I do want to say, just on a personal note.
Personal news?
Sure. The personal news.
Yeah.
This will be my last podcast on MASN All Access. Tear rolling down Brendan's cheek. I can see it. I'm not, retiring, so don't worry about that. There's more to come. But I do want to say, this podcast has been my favorite thing that I've done at MASN over the last several years. We've done between all of our normal episodes, between the emergency episodes, the special episodes, about 250 episodes. And going back to the days when I was hosting with Bobby Blanco, and then I was hosting by myself during the pandemic from my parents' basement, and now hosting with you, Brendan, it has been my favorite thing because of the interaction that we get with the fans, the commenters, the listeners, the viewers every week. And it's because I get to do this with one of my best friends in the world, and Brendan Mortensen, who is staying on. He's not going anywhere. And hopefully going to continue this podcast and bring it to even higher heights. But if you didn't already know, but if you're listening to this podcast and you're watching this podcast, Brendan is incredibly talented. He is a ridiculously hard worker and one of the best friends that I've had in my life. And that friendship's not going to end. I'm not leaving anywhere.
We do still live together.
We do still live together. We are still roommates. However, no longer hosting this podcast, and I hope at some point down the road that we get to do something on air again together. But you're in good hands, everybody. And it's going to be tough for me to not get to do this and get to interact with all the commenters and viewers and all that. But we've had some great times.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening, for watching all these years. Thank you to Matt Bonaparte for producing this podcast. At Brendan Morty is his Twitter handle.
Whoa. I've got to say some nice things about you.
No. We can cut this off.
MASN All Access and this podcast specifically has grown to the heights that it has because of Paul Mancano and all of the hard work that you have done. We have gone from hosting this podcast in our apartment, in the living room during the pandemic, to these wonderful couches here in the studio, and you have still managed to bring everyone incredible Orioles content. As we're looking on the comments on YouTube, everyone is sad. I am sad. This podcast will not be the same without you. MASN All Access will not be the same without you. We have seen, the Orioles grow over the last few years here into a really fun, exciting team. I think the content has done the same, and you are to thank for that. So
thank you, Brendan.
We wish Paul the best in all of his future endeavors of hopefully still doing some fun Orioles things, being around, doing great work wherever you are. So thank you to Paul for everything that you have done.
Thank you, Brendan. I don't deserve those, but I'll take them. Thank you. That's very kind, Brendan. All right. Cool. Well, thank you to Matt Bonaparte for producing this podcast. At Brendan Morty is his Twitter handle. I am at Paul Mancano. I will not, but Brendan will. Catch you next time.